the Digital Fanfest on May 14th, we were finally treated to the full-length trailer for Endwalker, as well as the release of the cover art for the game. The figure at the top of the art, in my opinion, is none other than Venat herself. Soldier First Class created a wonderful video detailing the argument as to why this is undoubtedly her, so I won't cover that here, but we will move forward under the assumption that it is her. This is Cobheran, and I invite you to strap in and get ready because I'm about to go full Charlie on how Venat, Sharlayan, and Fandaniel are all working together.
I want you all to die! And I want to die too! Oh,
When the
yes.
Scions first meet this plucky piece of walking garbage, he makes his aims very clear. Recreate the final days and leave the planet devoid of life before dying himself and breaking the cycle of reincarnation that he's been trapped in for 12,000 years. On the surface, this seems a fairly shallow motivation until he reveals the Telophoroi.
We, the Telophoroi, shall be your performers and this very star our stage.
He uses the term we Telophoroi, indicating that he is not working alone. One could assume that he is speaking of Xenos, but Xenos has no interest in the final days. Rather, his interest is wholly fixated on having another playdate with his best friend and showing off his new toys. So who is this we, if not Xenos? For that, let's examine who else has the motivation to destroy the world. When we first learn of Venat through the recordings in Anamnesis and Niter, we discover who opposed the summoning of Zodiark and is convinced that Zodiark is a temporary solution to the final days and the sound. The Convocation seemingly refused to hear them out, which makes sense as they were tempered, and any implication that Zodiark was anything less than perfect had no place in a council of rational people. We also learn that Azem waved off Venat and her group because... And Azem probably thought, if the sound ever popped up again, they could probably just punch it, as Azem was clearly a monk in ancient times. So Venat and company summon their shiny blue drunk Crystal Mom, who starts wailing on Crystal Dad about how he doesn't give her enough. Sure enough, Venat is totally fine with this, along with destroying what remains of their entire civilization and way of life for the greater good of surviving it all. This is important. Fast forward 12,000 years. From the start, we learn that Hydaelyn is weak, very weak, due to her protracted conflict with the disciples of Zodiark. Though we have gotten brief flashes of lucidity from her after we regain the blessing of light in Heavensward, we have not heard from her since, presumably because she doesn't have the strength. This bodes ill for Venat, as her cycle of reincarnation will likely end when Hydaelyn does. She is on her last incarnation if this is the case, and she needs to make sure there are no more rejoinings in order to maintain the order that she envisioned for the world. She learns of Fandaniel, an Ascian who seeks to escape his fate, and brings him in on her plan. Destroy the source and break the cycle. Without the source, the remaining shards cannot be rejoined, and they will all be cast adrift in the ethereal sea, breaking the weak ethereal bonds that connect them. Shadowmeowth recently did some real-world research on the perspective of Venat. Venat is derived from a Latin word, venari, meaning to hunt. In ancient Persian mythology, Venant is one of the 4 royal stars, which are modernly known as Regulus, who worked for the good under Ahura Mazda, is the guardian of the summer solstice, and is known as the Watcher of the North. When checking this star, Regulus, designated Alpha Leonis, abbreviated to Alpha Leo, is the brightest object in the constellation Leo, and one of the brightest stars in the night sky, lying approximately 79 light-years from the Sun. Regulus appears singular, but is actually a quadruple star system composed of 4 stars that are organized into 2 pairs. The spectroscopic binary Regulus A consists of a blue-white main sequence star and its companion, which has not been directly observed, but is probably a white dwarf. HD 87884 is separated from Regulus by 176 degrees and is itself a close pair. Regulus, along with 5 slightly dimmer stars, Zeta Leonis, Mu Leonis, Gamma Leonis, Epsilon Leonis, and Eta Leonis, have collectively been called the Sickle, which is an asterism that marks the head of Leo. But why does it matter that Venat is so closely related to Leo? The answer to that lies in the convocation of 14 itself. When we look at the constellations of memory that we found in Amarot, we notice that each stone is engraved with a specific constellation. The first stone we find, the Crimson Stone, belongs to Fandaniel and is engraved with the constellation of Leo. But why would Venat commit such an atrocity? With no future left to her, and with the greater good of saving all life on the shards in mind, she would likely gladly trade the life of 1 world for that of 5. Thus, Venat's heresy is complete. Venat is a heretic! But what about Sharlayan? We actually know quite a bit about Sharlayan, but we can distill what we know down to a couple of things. Sharlayan is extremely protective of their knowledge, up to and including assassinating those who leave with the intent to disseminate knowledge. The Sharlayan maintains its monopoly on knowledge and leverages that power over the rest of Eorzea. We see this in the very aetherites used in the region, which are of Sharlayan design, though clearly inferior to those of the homeland. I'm pretty convinced there's a backdoor to shut them all down if the Eorzeans get out of hand, mark me. As well as positioning themselves as a benevolent hub of research and scholarly pursuit, while murdering and oppressing in the shadows. Not to mention, Sharlayan possesses an extreme case of isolationism. In the trailer, despite the entirety of the world facing annihilation, Sharlayan still maintains its stance of total non-interference, or stasis. But why is Sharlayan so calm despite the end of the world, which they are very much a part of? I posit that in Sharlayan they don't actually need the rest of the world, because Hydaelyn lives among them. All she requires is their faith and supplication to save them from the doom of the final days. But they seem perfectly calm for Hydaelyn's chosen few. That's probably because they have a way out for the few that Venat has chosen to live in her paradise of light, and even fewer with whom she shares the burden of truth with. If we take a look at the overhead of the forum, we see 13 figures seated and a speaker in the center. Here, Venat has built a new convocation in her image, and Sharlayan is her Amarot, one she will not allow to go silently into the night. Further solidifying this hypothesis is when we look at the dungeon trailer footage. When we see footage from what can only be the inside of the Thavnarian Tower, we see this same spiral design appear inside this dungeon. If we look at the previews of Labyrinthos, it mirrors Sharlayan design and architecture almost identically, but also has traces of being very much older than the modern city on the surface, and possibly unknown to a good many who live in the surface-side city. It is an escape pod, a self-sustained world capable of making the long journey to another place and taking Venat's paradise to a new home, one that she herself saw fit to prepare and empty in preparation for their arrival millennia ago. It is very likely that Venat began her plan soon after the Sundering itself. Realizing that Hydaelyn's energy was finite in this new fragmented state, she set out with Hydaelyn's power for a new home, as this one would eventually be lost. Her followers remained, but she had to lead and to guide them, slowly rebuild faith in her. She watched as she and those around her grew old, withered, and died, She chose a new form, and fueled by the faith of those who believed in her prophecies, she manifested it in the form of her choosing, as a primal, much as Elidibus did. Seeing the shattered world, she knew it relied on a precarious balance, and after watching the fall of the 13th and the rejoining of the 5th, Venat realized that she needed an escape plan. Through Hydaelyn, she reached out to the farthest reaches and learned of the Dragon Star and the Omega Star, and set about influencing them and setting them to war. Omega Star succeeded in chasing the dragons from their home, and riding her etheric tendrils, Midgardstormer made his way to the shattered source to make his home. Millennia passed, and Hydaelyn grew weaker with each rejoining. After the 6th calamity, a tipping point had been reached, and Venat concluded that with Hydaelyn's remaining power, she would be unable to prevent further rejoinings. The only way to ensure that the worlds that remained could survive would be to destroy the source. Hydaelyn no longer had the strength to continue resisting, and so she put her plan into motion. She built Labyrinthos and Sharlayan, a self-contained world that could be ready for the day when it could leave the source behind and claim the now empty Dragon Star. As the 7th Umbral Era approached, Hydaelyn put the last of her blessing into a single hero to finally eliminate the Unsundered. The plan worked, and as the last of the Unsundered fell, Venat's agent within the Convocation, Fandaniel, sprang into action, finding a tool of sufficient influence and power to be able to recreate the final days. All for the greater good. With the source destroyed, Sharlayan, now in Labyrinthos, will begin its long journey towards the Dragon Star, and the shards will be severed from each other and forever condemned to drift throughout the rift.
One life for one world. A fair exchange. Wouldn't you agree?